Since I've got these glasses, I can read in any light. So I decided to continue reading out of Return to Elysium, where Lucina is being mentored by Escapest. This is a life of Joan Grant, who wrote about her far memories and her incarnations. Return to Elysium is playing in Greece in the 2nd century BC. We're now in chapter, I think it is 12, entitled Escapest. I just want to make sure that the last one was 11, was it? Yeah, Escapest. It was soon when I woke next day. It was noon when I awoke next day. For a moment I was surprised to be in my own room. Then I remembered that Escapest had brought me home to Elysium last night. It had been a long and silent walk along the familiar paths. He must have guessed that I had suggested we left the cottage, because I wanted us to get back to the security of ordinary surroundings. We had always been separated by the relationship of master to pupil. Now, for the first time, we should be able to talk as equals. Now I could teach as well as learn. We should recognize each other's knowledge as two facets of the same crystal, for I also could speak with authority. I went to the room where he usually worked and found him sitting at a table under one of the windows. He was reading a letter and did not look up or give me any greeting when I came in. I was used to his preoccupation, and so waited without anxiety for him to speak. It was a long letter, and he read it over again before he rolled it into a closed cylinder, tied it with one of the linen threads which he took from a pottery dish, and put it away in the box where he kept his private documents. Then he turned to me, making a trivial remark that the weather was unusually hot for autumn. His words were flat as stale water, and he looked old and very tired. Fear crept into the room. Had the cat been stronger than I realized? Had it come back to attack him, while I slept in the false security of the soldier who is too vain to know that the enemy has only paused to summon fresh legions? I went to kneel beside him. Escapest, did the cat come back? He drew his hand slowly across his forehead, as though he were trying to clear his mind of miasma. Cat? What cat? He spoke as a man may speak of something trivial when his thoughts are deeply preoccupied. The cat of Bast. You watched me fight against her last night. Forgive me, he said very wearily. I shall never forget the conflict. I had only forgotten the form in which you explained it to yourself. So you don't believe me? I had to ask the question, though it seemed already to have been answered with such terrible sincerity. I knew he meant to be kind. It was not his fault that to me his words were cold as iron nails driven into my hands. I have to believe you, he said, and he sounded like a man accepting the sentence of slow death from a physician. Then how can you be unhappy? Please don't be unhappy. Don't try to put a barrier between us. Being set apart from you is the only thing which could break me. If I lie to you, there will always be a barrier. You're right. I'm not strong enough to lie. He opened the box and took out the letter. Very slowly he untied the thread and smoothed out the scroll before he gave it to me. Read it, Lucina, and understand why I am afraid for us both. I recognized the writing. I'd often seen it before when the physician of Athens wrote for a fresh supply of the medicines we made for him. How did this reach us so soon? I said. The horseman who brought it must have ridden like a centaur. I thought you would have heard his arrival. He left Athens soon after dawn, an hour after the woman's return. The first part of the letter was written yesterday. After the formal greeting, I read, It appears conclusive that this new evidence, so profoundly disturbing, cannot be ignored, even though it may destroy the value of the work we have so painfully accomplished. If we, the realists, are forced to acknowledge the existence of malign forces beyond our normal control, then we have little hope of curing mankind, or ourselves of the diseases of fear and superstition. I will enumerate the facts as they are known to me. hoping you may be able to provide some explanation which will not invalidate our established promise that the individual is the master of his destiny. I need not stress the urgency of the task, nor the horror of failure. I send these cases to you in the confidence that they would serve to help you cure the girl Lucina of a persistent, but not unusual series of fantasies. You and I cannot escape the results of this experiment. Truth cannot be denied, even if she appears to us in the role of the destroyer. The first woman was sent to me by a fellow physician of Kos. He had failed to cure her of asthma, with which she was so seriously afflicted that she was unable to carry out even the most trivial duties of her household. These attacks occurred whenever she heard rain. During a storm she became almost demented with terror, and has on occasion seemed on the point of death by strangulation. She married at 17, but would never let her husband approach her. As she said, she had had a child, it would die of suffocation. If she had a child, it would die of suffocation. When questioned, she could not explain this fear, but repeated that the child would die because she could not clear the mud from its nostrils. Careful research into her family background has failed to bring to light any incident of her early childhood which might have been at least a contributory cause. Rain fell heavily yesterday evening. She showed no distress, and at her own suggestion went into the garden and walked with bare feet through mud. When I asked her why she had lost her fear, she only said, "I don't know. I've realized it was silly. I forgot that the mud cannot destroy the rock." She wished to return to her husband and says she is now eager to have a child. Her family overwhelm me with gratitude and make me feel a charlatan. Shall I send you the gifts which I cannot in honesty accept, or give them to the poor? The second patient is one of the richest men of the state. He suffers from delusion of poverty, and in spite of every argument of logic is convinced he will die of starvation. I told him that he might find release from his fears if he would give away half his possessions, considering that they were too heavy a responsibility for him to. This suggestion he received with symptoms of extreme anger, and became so insulting that I refused to continue in my effort to help him until he offered to treble his original fee. He left my house this morning, his attitude unchanged. He was in extreme anxiety to get home, as he believes that someone has tried to break into his treasure room. The most significant statement he made was that the treasure is in coin or gold dust, that it is kept in leather sacks, which each bear his seal in purple wax. Did Lucina see his gold as grain? Was the starving slave the mental image of the rich man's conception of his inevitable destiny? Can we in honesty accept any other explanation? The third man was my favorite pupil. So far as I can discover, he is entirely free from any disease of mind or body. I sent him as a check to discover whether Lucina would see any suitable catalyst to project her own interior conflicts into the objective field. She was not deceived. Here the writing changed. It slanted across the page and there were several blots. The last case was an old beggar woman, whom I took because my servants were afraid of her. She had the reputation of being possessed. The symbol of her terror is the cat. Even a kitten would send her into paroxysm akin to epilepsy. When she woke from the lether, she went to the kitchen and brought a cat to the room behind the stables, where I allow her to shelter. I found her crooning to the animal as though it were a child. Already my household looks to me with new respect. I'm now endowed with the capacity to cast out demons. I've not yet had the courage to inform them that their master is both ignorant and a fraud, who accepts honours to which he has no rightful claim. But what would have happened to Lucina if the cat had won? Would she have been possessed? I humbly charge you to use every means in your power to prevent her coming into contact with anyone whose full sanity you have reason to doubt, to do less hope you got the last sentence. Would she have become possessed? I humbly charge you to use every means in your power to prevent her coming into contact with anyone whose full sanity you have reason to doubt. To do less would be deliberately to expose her to the next extreme peril for which we know no cure. Okay, this is the first part of Escapest.